Welcome back. This is the Catholic Lady, and we are reading Great Line of God by Taylor Caldwell. This particular book is out of print, but you can find copies at used bookstores, and hopefully with some interest, maybe someone will decide to reprint it one day. So anyway, this is a book that I've started reading, and we are on Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is large, so we may have to divide this into 4 segments. Okay, and we'll begin. Great Line of God, Chapter 3. I do not understand this matter of alms and charity, said Aristo the Greek to Saul. Certainly Socrates recommended it, but it was an astonishing thought to his countrymen and was hardly taken with seriousness. We Greeks understand justice. Aristotle loved the square, for it to him represented a perfect justice, equal and balanced with all other sides. Aristo chuckled. The Romans loved dice too, but for an entirely different reason, and they are no philosophers. But let us consider alms. Mercy, though you Jews do not credit it, was not invented by you. We highly approve of mercy. I can quote you a dozen of our philosophers who esteemed it. But reckless alms, or even prudent ones, as a duty, is not to be understood. Yesterday you gave your last drachma to a beggar near the gate of the synagogue, and he was repulsive to the eye and distinctly offensive to the nose. You gave it, I observed, with no open sadness and sympathy. I have told you before, said Saul, with all the exasperation of a youth of 14 years. We are commanded to give alms and tithes. It is a holy command. It is indeed a duty. What if the object of our charity, our alms, is repulsive, perhaps even detestable? That is not to influence us. In short, said Aristo, you give because it is a command of your God, and not because you feel sorrow for the object of your alms. Saul's red, thick eyebrows drew together in a scowl. Aristo had the vexing ability to drive home a point like a cunning nettle's sting. The youth hesitated. I know my father gives with pity, and Reb Isaac with a blessing, but I feel no response to the beggar. It is my hardness of heart, or my youth, which time will repair. In the meanwhile, I obey. But that you would not comprehend, my teacher. Aristo considered and slowly shook his head. It has not occurred to you, of course, that charity can destroy the receiver. If a man knew he could not beg bread and a copper for wine, he would work for it, would he not? That, too, is of no importance. You give because it endows you with a feeling of virtue. Saul almost shouted with exasperation, You refuse to understand. I am only interested, Aristo grinned, his lively lips spreading almost from ear to ear. You know, of course, that in Rome, in the middle of their abominable Tiber, there is an island with a hospital upon it for slaves and the very poor who cannot afford a physician. You know, of course, that we Greeks have hostels for the homeless and the sick, and that our great medical university in Alexandria cares for thousands every year. But it is not guilt which inspires us to aid the infirm and the despairing. He laughed a little. Guilt? Cried Saul. Have you not told me on many occasions, Saul ben Hillel? Again, you do not understand. Saul's eyes were snapping with angry blue fire. You have the capacity to infuriate me, Aristo, and you do it with calculated deliberateness. Yet I have explained over and over. The guilt refers to our fallen race, to Adam and Eve. Aristo nodded. We too have such a story, but it refers to the flood, which is a historical event. One perfect couple survived, but they did not breed another race from their own bodies. The gods taking pity on their lonely state and listening to their prayers, told them to walk from the remaining little temple and throw stones after them. From those stones were born the Titans and men. We, their descendants, if you believe the interesting tale, feel no guilt that we were born of stone, and that we are not of the race that perished, except for that one perfect couple whose descendants we are not. Saul waved his hand in rough dismissal of the story. That is only a myth. I am referring to the fact that humanity is a fallen race, without merit, through our sins and our disobedience from the beginning. That is our guilt, and only God, blessed be his name, can erase it and lift us from the pit of it. A gloomy story, said Aristo. Why should a man feel guilt because of the sin of his ancestors, if the story be true, which I doubt? If he is fallen, who awoke him to life? And is not the awakener guilty if the man is guilty? Does a man ask to be born into this world? Your God seems to be perverse, the creator of evil, if man is evil, which I deny with some reservations. Your God would seem to me to cure all mankind for a sin committed by others, which would make him less endowed with mercy than the meanest of his creatures. A vengeful deity, and I do not approve of him. Saul said, What is man that thou art mindful of him, the Son of man that thou visitest him? We are nothing. God has created us that we may be worthy of his love and his salvation, which he has promised us through the ages by the merits of his Messiah, and no merit of our own. We do not understand each other's semantics, Aristo, because we do not speak from the same frame of reference. True, said the Greek. No man speaks with another man's semantics and meanings, for each man's history is uniquely his alone, and he endows words from his own life's experience, which can be no other man's. Yet Socrates asks us to define our terms. And much as I revere Socrates, I feel he was either jesting or guilty of stupidity. My terms are not yours, and never can they be. You deny absolutes. So does any sensible man. Yes, I know Aristotle spoke of absolutes, but he meant the only absolute, which is God. I have told you of our altars to the unknown God, above all other gods. But let us return to the subject of charity, of alms. I have heard an old story. A gentle-hearted sage of some substance was riding on his ass to the marketplace, where he would continue his study of mankind. On the road he was accosted by a beggar, who asked for a single coin to buy bread. The sage was much moved by the man's misery, so he emptied his whole purse into the beggar's hand. Whereupon the beggar, recovering from his astonishment, remarked on the warmth of the sage's cloak. The sage removed it and placed it about the beggar's shoulders. The beggar then quickened to the subject, perceiving he had come upon either an unworldly man or a fool. He admired the girdle of the sage and its gorgeous Alexandrian dagger, and so he acquired both. Then came the sage's boots, lined with wool, and he was soon sitting in the dust, avidly putting them on his bare legs and feet. Rising, he complained to the sage that he was far from the city, and he was desirous of visiting a tavern there where he could spend the alms on food and reviving wine. The sage hesitated then, but recalling that he had a good house in an olive grove, and that he was not hungry, and that he had friends in the city who would give him food, dismounted from the ass, and with a noble gesture invited the beggar to mount it. The beggar avidly obeyed, and sat high on the cushion, and took up the whip arrogantly. Then seeing the sage standing in the road, and the dust on his bare feet, without a cloak or a drachma in his purse. The beggar gazed at him with contempt. "Begone, beggar," he cried, and he cut his whip across the sage's face and merrily rode away. Now, my Saul, could you guess at the sage's thoughts? Saul blinked his red lashes. He eyed Aristo suspiciously, knowing that the Greek had him in a trap of words. Then he said, if he were a sage, then he would console himself with the thought that the beggar now had some comfort and money, and he would be content. And if he thought that idiocy, then he was not a sage, said Aristo, nor was he human. Saul, were you that man, what would be your thoughts? Saul stared at him with his strange eyes. Then his freckled, deeply colored face broke into laughter, loud, rollicking laughter. I, myself, would have pursued the beggar, dragged him from the ass, and would have thrashed him soundly. Saul, Saul, I have hopes for you, said Aristo, slapping the youth's sun-reddened bare arm. But what would Reb Isaac have done? Saul laughed again. He would judiciously counted out an exact tithe from his purse and given it to the beggar, and so would my father. You have me, said the Greek. Still, it is an interesting story, and illustrates what happens when even virtue can become excessive. A man who gives his all is as stupid as a man who gives nothing. You see, I defer to your burdened sense of guilt. I myself would consider I would be doing the beggar an evil by encouraging his beggary. He paused. There is another thing which bewilders me. I have heard your father, my master, dispute with Reb Isaac as to whether indeed your Moses wrote 10 of your David's Psalms from the number 90 to 100. Of what importance is the author? Your father has recited the Psalms to me, and many of them are beautiful, if incomprehensible in part, and beauty is all that is important. There are many who say that Homer, being blind, could not have described the burning of Ilium so magnificently, nor discoursed so tellingly of the countenances of men and women, and therefore he was only author in part of the Iliad and the Odyssey. But we do not argue so passionately on the subject as does your father and your mentor, Reb Isaac, and of what importance is it? Your Homer was merely telling tales, or the real author was, but we are concerned with the question of truth, Aristo. Is truth more than beauty? I dispute that. Or, in a more metaphysical way, I could declare that they are one. However, is your Moses, from your uninviting heaven, calling on all Jews to defend his authorship, and David also? Saul pursed his wide, sensitive lips and considered. You still do not understand. To dismiss the question casually is to belittle the Psalms themselves. You Jews take nothing casually and lightly, said Aristo, and therefore you are an irritation to other men. Tell me, do Jews ever enjoy themselves, or is their wailing about Jerusalem their secret pleasure? Must Jews be sorrowful so they can be happy? Our household is happy, said Saul, frowning again. Is it truly? I have never heard much laughter in it, except in the slaves' quarters, and even there they mute their mirth in deference to the master. I have seen no gay drinking. I have seen no real feasting, though you have many days in which you declare you are feasting and rejoicing. Aristo rolled his eyes dolefully. Your father has his guests, and after the meal is over, they spread scrolls upon the table and pore over them and dispute until midnight and later over the most meager of obscure meanings of some commentator. Is that gaiety, laughter, joy? I have seen no musicians here or singers. I have observed no dancings. Yet did you not once tell me that your David advocated music and singing and rejoicings in God? In a spiritual fashion, said young Saul. Aristo sighed elaborately. I fear you do not even I fear you do even your grim deity an injustice. Observe the world. Is it not beautiful, intricate, majestic, harmonious? Is not the air sweet and salubrious? Are not the skies an awesome wonder at night? Is not the garden of the world green and blessed with flowers? Do not the birds sing and the animals of the field dance with glee in the spring? Do not men and women love, and is not their love the loveliest thing in creation? Does not sound of music linger entrancingly on the ear, whether it is made by man or the multitude of the voices of nature? Is not all a delight? The world is but a snare for our enticing, said Saul, but he looked about the garden, and a secret shadow of wild excitement ran over his face. We are not concerned with the world, of which evil is the master, but with God. I still say you insult him. Moreover, I have seen your father at sunset, on the conclusion of his prayers, looking about him with a pleasure that is sublime in its innocence and happiness. He does not bend all his thoughts on the evil of the world. He sees deliciousness in it also. He sees brightness and glory. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. As Hillel had often intimated such things to Saul in the past, the youth became vexed. My father is not a man of deep spiritual dedication, he said, and I say this without disrespect, for I know he would admit it himself. I think, my Saul, that he is more spiritual than you, though frankly I am not enchanted by the word. He put his head on the side like an impudent large bird and said, I have observed that the Jews and the Romans seem disturbingly similar, both concerned humorously with the absolute law, though of course the Romans, for the last 2 or 3 centuries, have not been too meticulous about it. We Greeks call them a nation of grocers, but I think they are a nation of lawyers, and so they have esteem for the Jews who, alas, are mentally of such a breed also. I have not told you as yet, said Saul. I am to go to the University of Tarsus, and among other things I will study the Roman law. I would be an advocate for my people. You will make an excellent lawyer. You believe you are invariably right.